made out of blocks of limestone. That's the original wall. So basically I had that wall transformed into split layers, like fossil layers, layers of limestone under the earth. Then they have a line of petrified seabed as a fossil, and then the wall continues. And in an 80-foot long wall, the wall slowly transforms back into cut limestone blocks like you see in any archaeological or any geological formation. So micro, macro. So that work at CIA, and for the 10 years after CIA, that was heavy stuff. I mean, I was working with institutionalized secrecy, subject of espionage, passing secrets, deceit, all sorts of things like this. I needed a break. So basically, remember that projector at MIT. So that projector at MIT was a pricey object. So basically what I did is I copied every millimeter of it and made drawings of it. And I bought the lenses, only the glass lenses from Austria. So I bought the lenses from Austria, but built the whole unit myself, and then powered it by a generator, and put it in the back of a Jeep, and went out west with a whole series of slides. Each slide was about 12 by 12 inches. And basically went into the desert with this projection system, an assistant, and a 4x5 camera, and set these things up. Often, like this is shiprock. We set up the projector about a half a mile away from shiprock, and projected the grid, physically projected the grid onto shiprock, and this is exactly what it looked like at 2 o'clock in the morning on a moonlit night. And so then I photographed that tableau in front of me. This was a way for me, there were a whole lot of artists who were using bulldozers and earth movers and making public art, making private art actually, with the environment. I tried to make as large a possible a statement as I could without leaving any kind of trace on the landscape. And this is the easiest way for me to do it. It was two of us, a projector and a camera, and we'd zip in, and we'd do this during the night. If it wasn't right, we'd drive from Utah to Denver to process the film, and then back shoot it the next night. If it wasn't right, we'd go back and forth for this 8-hour drive each direction until we got it right. A very grueling thing, something I wouldn't do at this age. This is the same kind of idea. Today, these hills are very pristine when I shot these pieces in probably 1995 was the first time I went out there. Now, these hills are completely covered with all-terrain vehicle tracks and motorcycle tracks and everything, and they're more or less wasted. All this is sort of a wasteland now more than it was. Of course, in the 18th, 19th century, people thought it was a wasteland anyway. But one of the main reasons I went out west to do the grid pieces, the one you saw before, was I was emulating the 19th century cartographers who were sent out west by the U.S. government to document landscapes. So if I projected a grid on landscape, basically that grid was linked by GPS to its particular location. So the title of the work was the GPS coordinates of that particular piece. This is another piece. I projected the concentric circles on a hole in the rock. This is called Hole in the Rock. And it's on the Indian reservation in Arizona. And basically, this is again at 2 o'clock in the morning with a lot of moonlight lighting the landscape. And those are star trails that go by in 15-minute exposures. This is a piece that I did in Oregon, off the coast of Oregon. It's called Bandon, Oregon. This is a circle that I projected, again, at 2 o'clock in the morning, but with like a 20-minute exposure. You can tell how long the exposure is on how long the star trails are. And this ring that I projected is 2 miles across. So that is 2 miles from here. And so it's a very large ring. It was projected in fog. And I went to the coast of Oregon in particular to work with fog. And I made several images using foggy environments. But this is the one that seems to have stuck. Now, this is the last projection. This is the last projection trip that I took. After this, I started something entirely new. The last projection trip took us to White Sands, New Mexico. White Sands, New Mexico is a very beautiful place. It's covered with gypsum crystal sand. It's bright white. When you're out in the middle of White Sands, New Mexico, you think you're at the Arctic. It's just an amazing place, and I thought it would be a great place for projections. But what I found was this little tiny store in the National Monument had this little booklet that says, well, guess what? 20 miles north of here was the place where the first atomic test took place. And in the book, it showed some very simple little tests, some very simple little experiments that they had done on in order to determine the yield of an atomic blast. And I became fascinated with the first atomic blast. So basically, you can imagine July 16, 1945, 5:30 in the morning, you're lying in bed, right? At that time, apparently in New Mexico at that time of year, it was dark. All of a sudden, the sky lights up, it's bright, and whoa, it's sunrise. Look over at the clock, no, it's only 5:30. The irony is that this is a radioactive clock sitting on your nightstand glowing with radium. So the radioactive clock told you that an atomic bomb just exploded, basically. So I thought that ironic. So I went around with a Geiger counter down there and collected radioactive clocks and started epoxy a clock in one end of a black box, epoxy a 4x5 camera in the other end, open the shutter, leave it for a month, and it makes this kind of image because the clock's no longer glow in the dark. So basically, I started collecting clocks. This is the time when the blast occurred, when the first atomic blast happened. This is another clock. Obviously, these are very faint. It took 2 months to take a picture of this one because these were so faint. And I did it over and over again until I got the clocks. This all started a project I did called Atomic Time. So I went into Los Alamos, New Mexico. And I went around to retirement homes. And I put up little signs. And then I went around to coffee shops and I put up little signs. The little sign says, do you have anything left over from the Manhattan Project in your basement? If you do have anything left over from the Manhattan Project, and you would like to have it shown in a major museum, please let me know. Obviously, the Smithsonian at the time was not interested in radioactive things or anything to do with the atomic bomb. They had exiled the Enola Gay out into Virginia somewhere. And so basically, they had no home and none of these pieces went anywhere. So basically, these objects here were very pivotal to the first atomic bomb. These are called pusher spheres. I found these at bird baths in 2 different people's backyards. The other places was somebody called me up and says, listen, meet me over at my house. And the guy, these are all octogenarians, people who work in the Manhattan Project. Los Alamos on weekends, Saturdays, was scrap metal day. And just like Ray and I would go down to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, Los Alamos opened their gates in the 1950s, and they put price tags of $5, $2, $3 on these historic objects that these scientists who had stayed around Los Alamos the whole lives decided to collect and keep because they knew they were important. They knew they were part of the first atomic bomb, but basically nobody really was interested in the atomic bomb history. So they kept them. And so they started coming out of the woodwork, and I bought up as many as I could in the town with the promise I had to buy them. I couldn't just take them and nothing, and I couldn't just borrow them because it got complicated when you're an artist trying to do an installation in a museum. So I started gathering equipment. This table actually came from the Naval Shipyard in Norfolk, but nobody but Ray and I know that. And so, but the other objects all came from Los Alamos. And so I built this into an installation, which is a recreation of the laboratory that built the first atomic bomb. Okay? So one of the interesting things about this laboratory, all this equipment was collected from Los Alamos. I basically didn't make any of it except these tables that these experiments are sitting on. I fabricated the tables, and I worked with images that I got from Los Alamos, which were very few and far between, incidentally, at the time before, like 9/11. And so I was able to recreate the atomic bomb in the internal physics package of the atomic bomb, the most accurate ever done. And so one of the interesting things about the laboratory, you might notice these little stools here. Well, these little stools are very particular. They're made in a very short, for a very short time, but the scientists liked it because what does that look like, sort of? An atomic explosion with a ring cloud, right? These guys loved these stools. They've had these around. It was a joke. They called a lot of their objects, they had pet names, most of them to do with Walt Disney movies at the time. So they had, Felix the cat was a Geiger counter, for example, and things like this. So basically the installation is an accurate representation of what the laboratory looked like, and this was my interpretation of Munch's screen. Okay, so I arrange the wires, I present the materials, I make the tables, I make all of these objects. I took those pusher spheres, those ugly metal spheres you saw as bird baths, and machined into this. It was part of the original atomic bomb form, and I machined it into this. So in the actual bomb, and this is all absolutely the scale, and as perfect as it's ever been, is inside here there's a ball, half a ball of plutonium. The other half is over here. So this is plutonium, and then it's surrounded by a cylinder of uranium-238. And inside that there's a little initiator made out of polonium and radium. And so this whole thing gets reassembled. So this piece goes on here, and then this goes on there, and then the top part of it, that cylinder slides inside here, and then these two spheres go on top of each other and make a solid ball of metal. That solid ball of metal is then surrounded by 18 inches of high explosive material, and in an atomic blast, the first atomic blast in Alamogordo, New Mexico, called Fat Man, that particular device was hauled to the top of the tower. They detonated the 18 inches of explosives that was lensed to push to the inside. It crushed this 18-inch sphere into a ball about 6 inches in diameter, physically crushed the metal. That caused that little tiny initiator in the middle to give off a burst of neutrons. Those neutrons fissioned the uranium-238. That's what caused the explosion, and the huge explosion occurred. That's the way an atomic bomb works. And this, according to the scientists that came to visit my exhibition, this is probably a 9 on a scale of 1 to 10 in accuracy of what it looked like. These are called criticality experiments. These tables are about this high, right? They're about like this, okay? So basically, in these experiments, the radioactive material, which would be this ball of plutonium, at night, or when they're not working in the lab, is a hydraulic cylinder, like the one in your local garage, but lowered this ball of plutonium way down into the ground so it wasn't dangerous anymore. Well, you wake up first thing in the morning, you're a scientist in Los Angeles, you go to the lab, you hit the cylinder, and the cylinder pushes the uranium up the plutonium. How do you protect yourself? So these are blocks of graphite, right? Graphite is a real good moderator of neutrons, and so this is fairly toxic, but I thought it was interesting that all these people doing these experiments were men. And so the top of the table was about here, and they put all the clocks here, okay? So think about it. And so, yeah, so that was sort of an interesting thing. And this is the interior of it, and that's the plutonium. So in a plutonium weapon, the amount of plutonium you need is about the size of a large orange. The amount of uranium-238 that you need to make a bomb is about the size of a small soccer ball. So the way two bombs are made is out of those two different materials. So basically, I took this installation to Gwangju Biennale in South Korea, right? And I took the president of South Korea through it. And we were followed by all these photographers. There was one particular Chinese photographer there who said he was taking really detailed pictures so that he could put it on the internet, right? And so I have to say, within 2 years, North Korea detonated the exact same device in North Korea. Now, who knows? The information's out there, but that's the way it is. So this is another criticality experiment, except it uses boron impregnated polyethylene. And this sphere here and this sphere here are about 7 inches in diameter. These are brought out of a garage, being held one in each hand, as if they were like the Holy Grail, okay? And they were brought to me, and so this was what the bomb went from 18 inches in diameter. By 1955, it had come down to this size. So this is the aluminum prototype that they would then machine out of beryllium to make the casing for the bomb itself. So basically, these were given to me, and then I built them into this installation. This is the interior. This is called a levitated sphere. This would be a small ball of plutonium in the center, and it will be levitated by little things that come out and support it. And so this ball goes together, it's surrounded by high explosives, and all of a sudden you have a suitcase-sized bomb. You no longer have to carry around a 10,000-pound bomb. So this is all very sort of scary stuff. These at the end of the night were put into these cylinders, which I collected from somebody else. This is another installation on how you determine the neutron flux of a particular amount of uranium. So this is all the original equipment that was used to determine those kinds of questions. Mary Curie